Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to solve some practice questions from chapter 20. Let's start with the first question. According to liquidity preference theory, the money supply curve would shift rightward. So we know that in liquidity preference theory, money supply is determined by the Fed. So we need to find out a policy by the Fed that increases the amount of money supply. So the first one is not correct. If the money demand curve shifted right, they are not related. Money demand is determined by the people's willingness to hold cash for purchasing goods and services. The second option, if the Federal Reserve chose to increase the money supply, yes, that is correct, because if Fed using the monetary policy tools increases the money supply, then the money supply curve is going to shift to the right. If the interest rate increase, that's actually is going to have a reverse impact on it. In order to increase the interest rate, the Fed is going to decrease the amount of money supply. So therefore, money supply curve is going to shift to the left. So this is not correct too. Therefore, the right answer is B. Second question, we have two graphs here. The first one represents the liquidity preference theory, and money supply is vertical and determined by the Fed, and money demand curve is a downward sloping curve. That means when the interest rates are higher, people would like to carry less cash for purchasing goods and services, but they prefer to buy interest-bearing bonds. Therefore, money demand curve is downward sloping. The second one represents the aggregate demand curve, where the price level represents the general level of prices and Y represents the amount of output. So, based on these two figures, and assume the money market is always in equilibrium, under the assumptions of the model, let's find out which one is correct. The real interest rate is lower at Y2. Let's find out at Y2, when you follow the figure, you will find out that price levels are P2 and then the interest rate is R2. The real interest rate is lower at Y2 than it's Y1. At Y1, actually, the real interest rate is going to be lower. Therefore, this is not correct. So let me explain one more time. If we have the price level P2, then the money demand is going to be in the second one, in the second line. Why? Because when the prices are higher, people need more cash to be able to buy the same goods and services. And therefore, the interest rate is R2. When the output is Y1, the price level is P1, which is a lower price level. And people does not demand that much money as they demand when the prices are P2. Therefore, we are here. And the intersection of money demand and money supply curve shows that we are in interest R1. So the real interest rate is actually higher at Y2 than it's at Y1. The quantity of money is the same at Y1 as it's at Y2. And the next one, the price level is lower at R2. The price level is not lower at R2 because the price level is P2, then it's R1, and the price level at R1 is P1. That's not correct as well. So let's understand this one. The quantity of money is the same at Y1 as it's at Y2. So by looking at liquidity preference theory, the quantity of money is determined by the intersection of MS and MD. And therefore, it's here, right? And given this, the quantity of money does not change when the interest rates has changed because the Fed does not change the amount of money supply. For that reason, the quantity of money is the same at Y1 and at Y2. Therefore, the right answer is B. Question number 3. According to liquidity preference theory, a decrease in money demand for some reason other than a change in the price level. So let's understand this on a figure. Here we have the interest rate. Here we have the amount of money. Money demand curve is downward sloping and money supply curve is vertical and determined by the Fed. So if for some reason the money demand is lower, that means we shift the money demand curve here. And now this is the intersection, new intersection. And this is for a reason other than a change in price level. We need to find out which one is correct. So first of all, the first point that money demand 1 and money supply intersects shows a higher interest rate. This is R2. The second intersection point is R1. And therefore, the interest rates are going to fall. So we know that the interest rates are going to fall. And when the interest rates are going to fall, remember that investment is going to be high. Why? Because you have now lower rates to borrow money. For that reason, since investment is increasing, aggregate demand curve is going to shift to the right. So that's the right answer. Question number 4. Assuming a multiplier effect, but no crowding out or investment accelerator effects, 100 million increase in government expenditures is going to shift the aggregate demand curve for sure to the right. Why? Because let's remember what aggregate demand curve represents. AD represents C plus I plus G plus NX. So if government expenditure increases by 100 billion and we have a multiplier effect but no crowding out, so that means the government spends money, $100 billion, and this will have a multiplied impact on the economy. Why? Because, for instance, that referring to your textbook example, if government buys planes, military planes with that money, that is going to be an extra income for the company. And company is going to pay this as a wage or is going to pay profit to shareholders. And therefore, this spending is going to increase consumption as well. And the impact of 100 billion on AD curve is going to be more than $100 billion. So for that reason, aggregate demand curve is going to shift to the right. Remember, shifting right represents an increase in aggregate demand curve. But the increase in aggregate demand curve is going to be more than $100 billion. Question number 5. According to liquidity preference theory, an increase in the price level causes interest rate. Just remember the liquidity preference theory. When prices are higher, people need more cash. When they need more cash, the money demand is going to increase. When the money demand increases, the interest rates are going to increase. So the interest rates are going to increase, yes, increase, which increases the quantity of goods and services demanded. Now we need to connect this increase in interest rates to aggregate demand. And we know that when interest rates increase, the investment is going to go down. Why? Because borrowing is going to be much more costly to finance the investment projects. Therefore, the demand for quantity of goods and services is going to go down. Question number 6. Which of the following statements generates the greatest amount of disagreement among economists? First one, increases in the money supply shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. In the long run, increases in the money supply increases prices but not output. That's not correct too. Most of the people agree that increase in prices in the long run creates inflation but not economic growth. Recessions are associated with decreases in consumption, investment and employment. Yes, there are some disagreement, but this is not the common one. We know that we see a decline in consumption investment and that causes the recessions. And this one is the one that creates a lot of disagreement among economists because some economists favor and support the use of fiscal policy to try to stabilize the economy. Some others think that fiscal policies is actually destabilizing the economy more. Therefore, the right answer is D. Now we have again liquidity preference theory here, demand curves and money supply. A shift of the money demand curve from MD1 to MD2, as you see in the figure, it's an increase in money demand, could be a result of what? So we need to find a reason that actually increases the money demand. A decrease in taxes, that could increase the money demand. Why? Because when the taxes are lower, we have more income, disposable income, that means after-tax income. So our spending is going to be higher. And if you remember, money demand is the demand for money for buying goods and services. So this is correct. An increase in government spending. When government spends money, this becomes an extra income for the people. Therefore, when people have more income, they spend more. That will increase money demand as well. An increase in the price level is also a reason because now you need more money to buy the same goods and services when the prices are higher. Therefore, all of them are correct. Question 8. The theory of liquidity preference is most helpful in understanding interest rate effect. As we know that the liquidity preference helps us to understand what happens to the interest rate based on money demand and money supply. Question 9. Which of the following sequences best explain the negative slope of the aggregate demand curve? So we know that when the prices are higher, the demand for money is going to be higher, and that leads to a higher interest rate, and then this higher equilibrium interest rate is going to lead to a lower quantity of goods and services demanded. So the aggregate demand is going to be lower. So 3 arrows up and the last arrow is down. Increase in price level, increase in money demand, increase in equilibrium interest rate, and quantity of goods and services demanded goes down. Therefore, the right answer is A. Question 10. When interest rate increases, the opportunity cost of holding money increases because you could earn interest if you don't hold money. So the quantity of money demanded decreases. Remember, the money demand is the demand for cash. For that reason, right answer is B. Next question. Again, you were given is the liquidity preference theory and the aggregate demand curve. Suppose the multiplier is 5 and the government increases its purchases by 15 billion. Also, suppose the ADE curve would shift from AD1 to AD2 if there were no crowding out. The AD curve actually shifts from AD1 to AD3 with crowding out. Also, suppose that the horizontal distance between AD1 and AD3 is 55 billion. The extent of crowding out for any particular level of the price level is how much? So let's decode this question. We know that the multiplier is 5. So that means if the government spends 15 million, then the total change in aggregate demand curve is going to be 75 million. So the distance between AD1 and AD2, AD1 and AD2 should be 75 million if there were no crowding out effects. But we know that because of the crowding out effect, the AD1, the distance between AD1 and AD3 is 55 million. So the difference between 75 million to 55 million should be because of crowding out. So how much is the crowding out? 75 minus 55, which is equal to 20. So therefore, the right answer is 20 billion. Question 12. Take the following information as given for a small imaginary economy. When income is 10,000, consumption spending is 6,500, and when income is 11,000, consumption spending is 7,250. And now we need to find the marginal propensity to consume for this economy. We need to first remember what marginal propensity to consume is. Marginal propensity to consume tells us how much my consumption increases if I have additional income, right? So we need to find first what is the increase in my income. My income increases from 10 to 11. So my income increases by 1,000. And how much my consumption increases because of an increase in income? The consumption increases from 6,500 to 7,250, which is 750. So what is the percentage of this additional income I use for spending? That is marginal propensity to consume. So MPC is 750, which is change in consumption, divided by change in income. That is 0.75. So the right answer is 0.75. Now the next question. Suppose there were a large decline in net exports. If the Fed wanted to stabilize output, what the Fed should do? That's the question. So we know that if there was a large decline in net exports, let's start with an equilibrium. This is aggregate supply, this is price level, this is Y, this is aggregate demand. And if net exports are going down, aggregate demand curve is going to shift to the left. So we want to stabilize the economy. That means we want to increase the output. So what we are going to do, we are going to change the money supply. In order to stabilize the economy, we need to increase the amount of money supply. While we are increasing the amount of money supply, we are decreasing the interest rate. And remember, when the interest rates are lower, investment is going to be higher. Therefore, aggregate demand is going to shift to the right, back its to original position. So we know that we need to increase the money supply, and we can do it by buying bonds, because buying bonds, we are injecting money, and that will lower the interest rates. Supply side economists believe that changes in government purchases affect both aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So when government spends more money for infrastructure, for instance, people have more jobs because employment is going to increase, also more income. But in addition to that, businesses are going to get advantage from a better infrastructure as well. Question 15. Other things the same, which of the following happens if the price level rises? We know that if the price levels are higher, we need to have more money. Therefore, money demand increases and shifts to the right. And that will create an excess demand initially for the money market. And when the demand for money increases, the interest rate rises. So therefore, all of them are correct. Question 16. The following facts apply to a small imaginary economy. Consumption spending is 6,720 when income is 8,000, and then is 7,040 when income is 8,500. In response to which of the following events could aggregate demand increase by 1,500? So we need to find out first marginal propensity to consume, and we know that marginal propensity to consume is percentage change in consumption divided by percentage change in income. The income changes by 500 and consumption changes by 320. Therefore, this tells us that 0.64 is the marginal propensity to consume. So we know that there is going to be an initial spending, change in initial spending, times multiplier is going to give us the total change in aggregate demand curve. And multiplier is 1 over 1 minus 0.64. Therefore, it is 1 over 0.36, which is equal to 2.77. So an initial spending here, which we don't know, but I know that the end result is 1,500, and I know that multiplier is 2.77. So if I divide 1,500 by the multiplier, I can be able to find how much I should change the initial spending. So if you divide 1,500 by 277, you get around 540. If there is a crowding out impact, then we know that, for instance, we look at this answer, a stock market boom stimulates consumer spending by 550, and there is a small operative crowding out impact because 550 times 2.77 is around 1,523. So if there is a small crowding out effect, then we can see that the aggregate demand curve increases by 1,500. So the right answer is B. Question 17, and this question is asking the crowding out effect. So what is crowding out effect? We know that it's the reduction in aggregate demand curve. So all of them, all the sentences starts with the reduction in aggregate demand. That results, and now we need to find out what is the reason. It's not monetary expansion, okay? Therefore, the right answer cannot be A or B. It's because of a fiscal expansion causes the interest rates to increase. When government spends money, people demand for cash. When they demand for cash, money demand increases. Therefore, interest rates are rising. For that reason, the right answer is C. Question 18. Suppose there is an increase in government spending, and we need to find out what Federal Reserve do to stabilize the output. So when government spending, let's do this. This is price, this is Y, this is aggregate demand, this is aggregate supply. When government spending increases, aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. So we have now an increase in output. We need to find a policy that decreases this output because we want to stabilize the economy. An increase in aggregate demand could lead to inflation. So we need to find a way to reduce the amount of demand. And we need to find which policy of the Fed would reduce the aggregate demand curve. So increase government spending, the Fed does not change the government spending. Increase the money supply. When the money supply increases, interest rates are lower. When there is lower interest rate in the economy, aggregate demand curve is increasing instead of decreasing. We need to find a situation that aggregate demand curve is decreasing. So the right answer is D. When the money supply is lower, interest rates are higher. When interest rates are higher, investment is lower. So aggregate demand curve is going to go down and the economy will be stabilized. Question 19. If at some interest rate, the quantity of money demanded is less than the quantity of money supplied. So we are talking about a situation such that we have this money supply and we have the money demand, and this is the interest rate and this is the amount of money. So we are talking about a situation where the interest rates are higher than the equilibrium. This is equilibrium. Why? Because for instance, like here, R bar, look what happens. Money demand is here and money supply is here. So what is going to happen if that is the case? People are going to buy interest-bearing assets. Why? Because they want to get rid of that excess amount of cash that they carry. They don't demand money and interest-bearing assets. And if that is the case, when they buy interest-bearing assets, this is going to decrease the interest rate and we reach to the equilibrium point. Question 20, we have again a figure here. This is aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply curve. And the economy is at equilibrium at point A. To restore the full employment, we need to shift the aggregate demand curve, right? Because if we shift the aggregate demand curve to here, then we go back to the potential output level. So we know that we have two policies, fiscal policy and monetary policy. But this time the question is asking the monetary policy because we have the Federal Reserve here. In order to decrease the aggregate demand curve, Fed should sell government bonds. Why? Because by selling government bonds, the amount of money supply decreases. Therefore, the right answer is D. And finally, the last question. A decrease in taxes shift aggregate demand curve to the right. Why? Because we have now more consumption, more disposable income to spend. Consumption increases. And when the multiplier is larger, the further it shifts. So therefore, the right answer is A. And this is the end of the practice questions. Thank you.